Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Those Bond Guys podcast. It's been a little bit of a break. Both Christopher and I have been busy with lots of things over the last month or so since our last podcast, but we're excited to be back. And of course, we have a guest here today, Christopher, right?
We do. And I hope everybody is also having a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and when this gets out, maybe even a Happy New Year, whatever it may be. But we're right in the heart of it. And we're here, like David said, with a guest, our very first time having a guest on the podcast, first of many times. We're very excited to do that. And Those Bond Guys podcast, I mean, it's in the name. We're Bond guys and gals getting together and talking about Bond stuff, the heart of what we do here. And so I am honored to introduce our very first guest today, talking about a topic that many people in the community love to talk and banter about. With no further ado, Fletcher from the Essence of Bond on Instagram, welcome to the podcast. And thank you for being here today, and happy holidays.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris and David. Thank you so much for having me. Happy holidays to you too. Season's greetings. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I appreciate you bringing me along. Yeah, let's kick things off. Let's get this thing going.
Yeah, I know. Before we jump into the heart of the topic, I know we know each other not only through the Bond community, but we recently got to hang out for my birthday weekend / the Cue the Music concert weekend in London past October. It was a lot of fun hanging out. I remember we met up at the Bollinger Bar and shared the appreciation of the planet Ocean, which I had no idea that, seeing, my face on YouTube inspired you to get that model, which was a lot of fun and really touching to me to know that, I kind of inspired somebody in a way. But what a great weekend that was, man. It was an honor to meet you. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was really kind of surreal, getting to meet you and a few others from the fan base. For the past God knows how many years, I've been interacting with various people through Instagram, through YouTube, through the laptop screen. But to have that tangible connection, and it never felt weird. That was the really interesting thing about it. It just felt natural, felt organic. It just felt like old friends, that we've known each other for quite some time. So yeah, man, it was a great experience.
Definitely. Yeah, I can agree. And I know David can attest to that too. Like I remember the first time we hung out when we grabbed coffee and hung out, and it just felt like we were old friends connecting. I mean, wouldn't you say so, David? It's like that.
Yeah, I mean,
community thing.
it's I guess the beauty of technology, right? And we get to connect with people that we are not anywhere near us, and then now we get to hopefully, after COVID and all these things and getting better, we get to actually see each other and meet each other, and this is a really, really cool experience. And it's really cool in the Bond community that we kind of create it, right? That's what I think is just so cool. Is like these aren't events necessarily put on by, Eon or Disney or whoever. We're creating these things, which makes it kind of special, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a testament to the Bond community and the fan base, just how passionate we are. We don't have to march to the beat of somebody else's drum to try and get things done. We do it ourselves. We reach out to each other, and just connect and connect over something that's a common interest, which is James Bond.
Absolutely.
So that's fantastic stuff.
And speaking of common interests, well, the topic of today, and I'll go ahead and let Fletcher kind of break it down a little bit, but it's going to be very interesting because it's definitely, especially, I'm looking at you, David, after the last movie, we have opinions about.
And I have a reputation around here.
Cannot wait.
Opinions, I guess.
Cannot wait, because I mean, okay, I'll be honest. I remember seeing the last film with David, and afterwards, oh boy, the look he had on his face and the things that he wanted to say. And now you're going to hear it all today. You're going to hear it all today right here on Those Bond Guys podcast. But we're kind of talking about the topic of where Bond went wrong, or what we kind of would like to see in the future, or what we think could have been done better within the past few 10 to 15 years. I mean, we know that Daniel Craig brought a huge new era of Bond elements to the table. whether you agree with them or not. I mean, that's what we talk about. That's what we love to talk about, and it's a lot of fun. But today we're gonna kind of just talk about and nitpick a little bit of the things that we've seen, and maybe if we had the keys to the franchise, what would we do different? So, Fletcher, appreciate you bringing up the topic, and so let's kind of break it down, shall we?
Yeah, so the first thing that springs to mind definitely is where everything all starts, and that's the writing. The writing for the majority of the Craig era has been, I'm trying to be diplomatic here.
Don't be diplomatic. It's going to get worse here in a minute, so don't worry.
It's been sketchy, and I think it's one thing if they've made a film and the writing wasn't great. That's one thing. But I think what really kind of frustrates me personally is that these films, as Daniel Craig often says, these films don't get made very often. And so when you have a lot of time, these huge gaps in between these films, and you hear Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson talking about they're constantly thinking about Bond, they're constantly doing something with Bond, you'd think that they would use the time a bit more productively to at least get the foundation and the basics right, which is the writing, which is the story. There have been several instances where it's been in the news or circulating within the community that the writers are doing they're making a rush, or they're trying to rush to get the script out because it's close to the deadline to start shooting. And I'm thinking, hold on a second, you guys have had 3-4 years to work on this film. Why is it that you're rushing to meet the deadline to get the script done? I think the biggest example was Spectre, where I think Purvis and Wade had left after Skyfall, and then they had John Logan exclusively writing the script for Spectre. He spent months on it, and then I think it was like maybe a month and a half or 2 months before they were due to start shooting, the producers realized that we can't use this, and then they had to bring in Purvis and Wade to try and doctor the script at such a late hour. That's not really that's I mean, I hate to sound pretentious or entitled, but come on, that's not really acceptable. This is Eon have been in this game for 60 years. 60 years they've been doing this. So you'd think they'd have a bit more they'd have a better understanding of how this should work. I mean, I don't really like using the MCU, Marvel Studios, as an example to compare, but because they're a very different vehicle. But what I will say is that that's a studio that's been around for about 10 years, and they don't always get things right. Trust me, there's a lot wrong that goes on over there, but they've got themselves organized to some degree. So if you compare a company like Marvel Studios that's been around for 10 years to a company like Eon that have been around for 60 years, Eon really shouldn't be making these sort of mistakes at this level.
I think it's an interesting point. And it's funny because when I was preparing for this, I was thinking kind of the macro view of obviously the 60 years, as you brought up, in terms of how things went wrong, but also kind of this last, obviously, time. And in looking, especially the more recent times, in America, baseball is our sport, right? It's a big sport here. I don't know.
Yeah.
Although I guess baseball is coming to England
UK.
too. Yeah, we saw that when we were there. But in a way, this to me is like exactly, it's a sports analogy. And in my daily teaching, that's I use a lot of sports analogies. But to me, what you're speaking about with Eon, compared to other things, it's very similar to like the New York Yankees and like our team that's right here near where we live, the Oakland A's, right? Where you have a team like the Yankees who are out and they've got infrastructure down to everything. They're going to be thinking now and 5 years in advance and 10 years in advance to make sure they have the best team no matter what. And they'll pay to make it get it done if they make a mistake, right? And then you have the Oakland A's, who are a team where it's like, we're going to piecemeal, and sometimes it goes really well. Sometimes it doesn't go super well. And but we're here really, number one, to make the money. And so we're going to put in just enough to do what needs to do to make it happen, but not enough to really make the consistency occur.
I really hope
to me,
there's no Oakland A's fans on this podcast listening. If there is, I'm sorry.
I have friends that are A's fans, and of course, it could be in lots of sports, right? But and I'm sure even in football, right? European football would be there's. I'm sure there's examples of that too.
Yeah,
but
football.
but I think I do. That's what I see from Eon, and a lot of my points, kind of that we'll talk about today, kind of do go back to that of like, Eon's obviously a company, they want to make money, but are they putting in the infrastructure in a lot of different ways to really make this at the highest level? Because obviously, I mean, No Time to Die made money, right? So I'm sure they're happy with that. But could it be? Is it really at that top level? And do they want it to be? And what changes need to be made for that to happen? And I think the biggest risk, which is true in sports, is if they aren't trying to achieve that, is there a risk at some point of it going away, right? Because that's what happens in sports, right? If you're not, those top teams always trying to get the best players, you already have a lot of good players, but guess what? You're going to get more. Then is there a risk of you kind of becoming irrelevant, I guess, in a way? And I think that's kind of what speaks to this whole, what you're talking about in this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose one of the, if we're talking about the relevancy of the Bond films, I think what Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson have done is, to our frustration, these films don't come out nearly frequently enough, and so with these huge gaps, they do kind of feel like prestige films, which I kind of get, so we're not saturated with an overabundance of Bond films. But in as much as I do think these films should come out a lot more frequently, so 2-year cycle, 3-year cycle, I don't think it's impossible for them not to compromise on quality. And I feel, I think it's a case of what is it that Eon want to do with these movies, because I feel like on one hand they want to cater to your Marvel and DC audience, because that's where the money is. When you look at the films dominating the box office, the films dominating the theater and cinema screens, it's these, it's the comic book movies, it's these tentpole vehicles. We don't get the mid-sized films anymore. When was the last time we got a film like Home Alone?
Right.
That successful iconic films back in the 80s, early 90s. We don't get those films these days anymore. It's all gone to streaming, so I think,
and they could be successful there, but it's not that cinema piece, right? There could be successful, but they're you're right, that's not even the goal of those films.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you take these Bond films and try to figure out, okay, who are we catering to? I think there really needs to be a clear understanding of who the audience is. So if we're going to target the MCU audience, how do we make sure that the films that we're making target them so that we can get the revenue, we can get the big box office, but at the same time still make these films interesting without trying to be too kind of highbrow? Because I feel like that's where Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson sort of found themselves with the Craig era. It was a case of having Daniel Craig was coined the thinking man's Bond. You know, he's an actor's actor. So you're bringing in all this sort of high caliber talent. Whereas if you look at the Brosnan era, that was a bit more popcorn. You had the flavor of the month Bond girls. You had your Terry Hatchers, your Denise Richards, Halle Berrys, you know, whoever. Those were, you know, kind of fluff pieces. Great films, but compared to the Craig films, I think it's fair to say that the Craig films were kind of seen as a bit more highbrow and prestigious. And so how do you find that perfect balance? You know, and I feel that's where Barbara and Michael have kind of fumbled a little bit. And that's why I'm very curious to see what Tom Cruise does with the next couple of Mission Impossible films, because they look, I mean, I'm not sure if you've seen the trailer. I understand that the trailer that they showed was actually B-roll footage, you know, and that was, you know, it looks like that's the sort of film the Bond films used to be. I'm talking about the classics. You've got the great stunts, the great action, and of course, a character who people would like to be. And I think that's something that was missing with the Craig era. I never wanted to, as much as I like Daniel Craig, I never ever wanted to be his Bond. I'll take his watches, but I don't want to be him.
You know, it's funny you bring that up, because I think what Daniel Craig's era brought a lot of too. And I mean, it's obviously apparent through the numerous accounts on Instagram, the, you know, the blogs, and the, you know, it's the branding and all the goods that you see with when it comes to Bond. Like, as soon as you think of Daniel Craig's era, you think of the style, which is great and fantastic for like me and David, as we connected on putting those homage outfits together. But like, they came from an outfit that was heavily branded by outside brands, which we know Daniel Craig is known for his style. And I'm almost wondering if the Eon kind of let Daniel Craig a little bit be a little bit too lenient when it comes to the branding. I mean, I love it and it looks great and it's really cool to see all the marketing, but I wonder that because a lot of times brands have a kind of say in when certain things are released, right? Because they want it to be released when it's close to the film, or they want it to be released for a certain moment in time, blah blah blah, because this is the Bond sweater, this is the Bond watch, this is the Bond shoe. And so I wonder if it's due to all of the different brandings and everything that comes with the Daniel Craig era, kind of put a little damper on the swiftness and the amount of time in between each film, because they kind of brought that into play. That came to mind just now, because you think about Daniel Craig and you think of all of the brands that are associated with it, right? You know, I mean, you have your classics like Omega, that's been around since Brosnan, but the newer brands like NPL and you know,
OB, Oliver Brown.
OB, yeah, right, exactly. So I'm almost curious, and I don't know what your guys' opinion is on it before we jump to our next point, but really quickly, do you think because of all of the branding that's kind of caused the delay in the films?
I mean, my thought on the branding is, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about before, is I think Eon's always been behind on branding. And we did, obviously, with Lindy Hemming, and then in collaboration with Daniel Craig, as the things went on, there was more accessible pieces and things, you know. But, you know, I don't know how much Daniel Craig was pushing that connection piece, other than like, these are things I like and I think would be good for the character. But I think Eon finally woke up and said, well, wow, we could make a lot of money off of these things, right? And actually make these connections that could have been being made for, you know, a long time before. Now, obviously, there were little pieces and things, but it's nothing like it is today, right? I mean, look at all these, look at No Time to Die, the amount of pieces and things that were accessible that people could get, you know, even from when I started, you know, really get into that piece of the lifestyle, you know, part of the, you know, like alternatives and things like that, with Casino Royale, which is really when I got into that part of it. You had to go out and find like things that look like that and things, because a lot of the items were just unattainable. And obviously it's gotten easier and easier, but I think, I don't think the branding per se has any impact on how often we get a movie. I think that has more to do with when do we need to get more money in, right? Like when
Right.
we don't need it, we don't need a new movie every 2 years, and that's a lot of work to do. And we have to have a lot of infrastructure, like these Marvel movies that have come out every year, or even the Mission Impossible, right, where they filmed the back to back. That's a lot of infrastructure and things to go around. We just need one every 5 years, and if we make a good amount of money, and maybe the story doesn't need to be great, right? Maybe, we have whatever it might be, and that's gonna bring people in. That'll be good enough, and that's what I see from Eon. So that's my kind of thought on that.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree. I think when you look, I think we'd have to center this viewpoint on the Craig era, because it's the era where we've had like the biggest gaps in film releases. And so Casino Royale, that came out 2006, and then Quantum of Solace 2008. And then there was that whole MGM restructuring because they faced bankruptcy, and that took about 3-4 years, because we got Skyfall in 2012. Now, I'm not quite sure why there was a 3-year gap between Skyfall and Spectre. Maybe they just needed a break. Daniel Craig may have needed a break or something. That was another thing. So Daniel Craig, I think he wanted to do other stuff, do theater work and that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, I think the brands haven't necessarily affected the delay of the films, but to your point about the brands, I do feel like this particular era, I think the brands have really really come into, front and center stage to, really kind of dominate Craig's defining component as Bond. Right. So yeah, ultimately, I do feel that the producers gave Craig a lot of control, a lot of power, definitely more so than any other actor before him as Bond. And I think he was definitely able to kind of shoehorn his own personal sense of style. And I think it was definitely No Time to Die where I felt a bit disconnected from the character, because I never felt like I was really seeing Bond. I was seeing Daniel Craig. And that, just to kind of circle things back, that is something that is a bit of a problem, because I don't want to see the actor. When Connery is playing Bond, I don't want to see Connery. And in fact, I don't see Connery. I see Bond because he's embodied that character,
And I think well, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say that with Daniel Craig, I think in his earlier films, Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace, and to some extent Skyfall, I wasn't really seeing too much of Daniel Craig. I was seeing the character more. But for Spectre, and especially No Time to Die, it was definitely, okay, I'm just seeing Daniel Craig right now.
Right.
And I think it's the risk of giving an actor so much power when they're not fully invested or in line with a character, right? It's one thing when you have, someone like these actor directors that are kind of helming the project, right? The Mel Gibson, whatever it might be, or even like Tom Cruise in the Mission Impossible, where it's like, this is really like his vision, like, and what he wants to create. I don't know if Daniel Craig even viewed it that way. And we know after Spectre, he didn't really want to come back, and, obviously he liked the heroic, quote unquote, we can argue that a little bit later, but, ending element. But I mean, I think, when you give someone that much power, if they're not in line with a more comprehensive involvement, obviously, I think it's that's where, especially with script and those type of things that we're talking about, then you're just trying to put connect the dots somewhere, and I don't think connecting the dots usually works for script writing.
I mean, wasn't
Yeah.
there an article that was released saying that Daniel Craig really was wanting to kill Bond's character off as early as Casino Royale? So
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I had
think,
heard the rumor
yeah,
that they had talked, like, there was a
yeah,
kind of cursory mention or something
yeah.
about it.
yeah.
I mean, I think he, like, obviously we weren't there, so we won't know for sure. But I
Mhm.
think, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if he said that, maybe sort of like in jest. But I don't think there was ever really a moment where he seriously thought, if I take on this role, I
Mhm.
want to kill off Bond. Because really and truly, at the time when he took on the role, that was the least of his problems. Because, you know, he thought he'd be lucky to just make it through Casino Royale, given, the backlash he faced, just from
Right.
his casting. And he needed to be able to get the character down right, just to, win over audiences. Um, and then he talked about introducing the elements that we're supposedly all familiar with, and we love, and in characters like Q and Moneypenny. So the idea of going beyond that to a point where you now get to kill the character off, it seems a bit of a stretch to me.
Mhm.
So
Which
So I have
is
a question. Oh, go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead. No, I was just go
Well,
ahead. You can.
Well, I was just gonna, going off this kind of, so we're, our topic is kind of how did Bond go wrong, and we're obviously focusing on kind of this Craig era
Mhm.
and transition from right before that. So I just had a question for both of you. Just kind of, what if you had one thing to say that you think was improved from Brosnan to Craig, and then one thing that you think you're like, this went wrong, this was not the good thing from Brosnan to Craig, what might it be? um Kind of in looking at that transition, something good, but then what went wrong, if you had to say, like, the thing, comparing it to the Brosnan era.
I think for me, the one good thing would be um, bringing credibility to the character of, or should I say, the nature of Bond's work as a spy slash assassin. Um, that's not to say that Brosnan wasn't great at what he did, but I feel like, again, it goes back to what Daniel Craig said when he first got the role. When he met his trainer, he said, I want you to make me look like a killer." And that's what Bond is: a killer. He's an assassin. He's also a spy. And so, give it, and remember, this is, after the whole 9/11 situation, where things were, uncertain. There was a lot of paranoia, there was a lot of suspicion, and, people wanted realism when, you know watching or viewing things through this lens, through this space, as opposed to the more sort of cartoony route that the Brosnan films ended up taking. So I think, making Bond a more credible spy assassin, um, is definitely a plus.
Mhm.
The negative, um, um, I mean, I would probably say the negative would be, the infrequent release of the movies. I'm just giving this as an example because there are quite a few
Yeah.
negatives, but I'll go with that one.
Yeah, I gotta agree. I mean, for negative at least, it's gotta be just the amount of time in between the films. But for positive, yeah, I mean, I love the fact that there was, and I agree completely, a realism and a more brutal Bond. I mean, I think we kind of discussed this off camera, Fletcher. They kind of were competing against the Bourne series, right? They were
Sure.
competing against other films that were coming out that had a bit more gory, a bit more brutal, a bit
Grit.
more grit, exactly. And I think when they brought that to Bond, of course, you have the different Bonds. You have Connery, who is Bond. You have Roger Moore, who's like the gentleman Bond, and then you have Dalton, who is the Fleming Bond, and then Pierce as the suave Bond, and kind of bringing that new era. But then you have Daniel Craig, who really is like the killer Bond, the grit Bond, at least for up until No Time to Die before he becomes Daddy Bond, and that we'll get to that in a minute. But
Daddy Bond.
yeah, he brought you gotta admit he brought some grit. I mean, think about the fight scenes in Quantum when he's going against Slate. Oh my gosh, that is something we haven't seen at all from Pierce Brosnan and any of the other Bonds. So I have to really appreciate that when they brought that to the table. I don't know if they were worried it was going to be a bit too much for audiences because they think of Bond as Bond, but the reality is he is, as Fleming wrote, a brutal killer that is fighting for king and country. So they did a really good job there, and I appreciate that, and the details. And one thing also is the fact that they brought back all the small, this is a second one, but I got to say this real quick. All the homages and the tropes when it comes to like the Aston Martin, like the DB5, and then the Moneypenny and Q, and they brought all that back for the more modern age. Like that was really cool to see, especially in Skyfall. When I remember seeing it for the first time, I was like, oh my god, like going to the new M's office at the end. I was like, that's the homage office to the old films. That was really cool that they did that. So I appreciate that as well, because there's some film franchises that they feel like they need to completely change everything and make it all new and modern. But when they bring things back to where they started in 1962 and kind of bring it for a more modern era, it's really kind of cool to see, kind of like an Easter egg, if you will. So that's what
I mean, my thing in terms of improvement, it's more of a base level thing, but I do love obviously as a lifestyle type person, the where they went in terms of connecting to be able to be like Bond, making it more accessible to everyone. Basically, with clothing especially, but lifestyle items, all those type of things. I think that was, like I said, a small thing in some ways, but really big, obviously, in the community, if you look around. My biggest issue, and this will kind of connect to where we're going now with No Time to Die, is the tone of the movies. That's really it. And that obviously affects the script, it affects all these things, but is what tone are we going for in these movies? And I mean, really, if you look at all of those movies, they all have kind of a different tone to them. And even within the movies, I think No Time to Die would be like the best example. The tone can't keep consistent, and I think that speaks to some of those things that Fletcher talked about. I agree. Like, I think having some elements of a Bond that can really do the fight scenes and those things is great. But my opinion is I don't think the Bond that was in the Craig era was the Fleming Bond. I don't see it. That's my personal opinion. And I think there's small elements, but as on the whole, I think they ignored a lot of elements of the Fleming Bond during the Craig era to kind of fit this. We want Daniel Craig, and this is what we're going to do for the modern times, while negating elements of Fleming. And I am, at my heart, my belief is the greatest Bond movies all start from Fleming's work, inspiration. The greatest scripts all come from that, and generally the ones that are not the greatest stray the farthest away from that. And I'm sure we can talk more about that as we get into No Time to Die a little bit.
I mean, I think I agree with you. One of the points that I actually wrote down when thinking about some of the issues that I have with particularly the Craig era was that I felt as though the films were almost sort of trying to apologize for who James Bond is. And the thing is, the films don't need to do that because everybody knows who James Bond is. We're celebrating 60 years, and so people will go out and see Bond films. That's just a given,
Yeah, you're right. And
so,
it's like we're trying to be Bourne now. We're trying to be Batman Begins. We're trying to be, whatever, that kind of thing. And but we can be our own thing, right? It's like instead of being a lesser version of these other types of franchises, be what Bond is. That's what's made it so successful for 60 years.
Exactly. That's how he started out. That's how he grew. and that's how he should continue to be, because Bond stands out from everybody else. I think I can't remember who I was having this conversation with. I'm not sure if it was you, Chris, or maybe Paul. But I was saying that the difference between Bond and your other action heroes, from your Schwarzeneggers, your Stallones, your Van Dams, your Jason Bournes, Tom Cruise, whoever. Bond, he's whichever way you want, however you want to slice it, dice it, whatever. Bond is very unique. The guy, you can take the most serious Bond film. So we're looking at maybe From Russia with Love, or For Your Eyes Only, or wherever it may be, Casino Royale. But there are some ridiculous elements in those films, but it's just Bond, and he's able to get away with it because it's Bondian. It's a Bond trope, not necessarily cheesy, slapstick, or corny or anything like that. But it's Bond. Who wears take The Spy Who Loved Me? Who wears a dinner suit, bow tied up and everything, walking through the desert, the Egyptian desert? Nobody does that, but James Bond does. So Bond, and then of course, his relationship with women. That's a whole other topic that we could go on.
Yeah.
I mean, James Bond's relationship with women, they say he's misogynistic and all of that stuff. I can see why people may think that, but James Bond is actually much more evolved than people give the character credit for. I think in order to move forward successfully, the films need to stop trying to justify Bond's relevance like they were doing from Skyfall onwards, and they need to stop apologizing for who the character is. We've heard ad nauseum, oh, we want to introduce these elements so people can reacquaint themselves with the character we all know and love. Who's the character we all know and love? Because the character I know and love is the character that was smoking cigarettes, that was, wearing, smart fitting suits, that was, going around doing his thing, sleeping with multiple women, all of that stuff. We shouldn't have to shy away from that. If people are offended by that, let them go and watch a Disney cartoon or something. Like Fleming said, Bond isn't made for 10, 11-year-olds, even though I'm sure we all started watching Bond much earlier on.
Yeah.
But Bond needs to, the films really need to just let Bond be. If they want to change the world around him, fine, but let Bond remain who he's always been.
And that's a great point. And I'm actually cool that you brought that up, because I have a few points on how to make Bond better for the future coming up. But speaking of, having the films kind of apologize for where Bond, was wrong and stuff, I kind of think back to No Time to Die. Like, they're making him really soft as a father and introducing Mathilde, and then the ending. So that being said, I think it's finally, brace yourself, everybody's, because here we go. I think it's gotten to the point, and I've been waiting and excited to hear David take it away from like your opinions on the latest film, No Time to Die, on how it really kind of, where Bond went wrong in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Fletcher. I think Bond needs to be himself. And my personal opinion is, I don't think necessarily, okay, in the books he's a big smoker. I don't think that's necessarily the most important thing, but I do think there's a core element of his personality, right, that is core to who he is. And for No Time to Die, I was not a fan of the movie. So I'll just say that to start with. To me, it was like, I saw it once in the theater with Christopher, and I had already known kind of, what was going to happen. And I'll be also honest that I don't love any movie really where like the hero dies. I like movies where there's success. So I'll just put that on the floor. But
Sure.
really my issue with No Time to Die, more than just the ending, which to me the ending is cliche. I think um it's an opportunity, kind of like what you just said, Fletcher. Let's put Bond in a different situation, right? Let's put him in a situation that Bond would not be in, right? Bond is a survivor. They've talked about this over and over and over. But this time, no, he's not going to be a survivor. We're going to put him as something he's not, right? I also think it's a little cliche that you know, we he has the resources of all of MI6, all of the world, to somehow fix this nanobot thing, over however many years, science, all of science of the world. But that's never gonna fix it. That can't happen, right? It's
Mm,
like, because basically, I mean, if you look at the movie, basically he's committing suicide, right? And if
yeah.
there's one thing Bond I don't think ever would do is commit suicide, right? Like that's just not Bond. Like he would, I mean, we've seen it. Look at well, in books, but in Die Another Day, right? Like they're gonna torture him till he dies. He's not going to commit suicide. He'll die from them torturing him.
Mm.
Yeah.
But
I think he mentions that he chucked away his cyanide pill,
Yeah.
years ago.
yeah,
You know.
exactly. Perfect. Exactly. So that's kind of my issue with the ending of the movie. I just, it's one thing if you want to kill off Bond, but it's, which I don't agree with anyways, but how it's done, going back to the script, I don't know. My biggest though issue with No Time to Die was the tone of the movie. And like I said, I think that goes back to all of Daniel Craig's movies. But, you get to this movie, you start out this great opening, right? All this in Matera. And then it goes to Jamaica, and it's almost like a Roger Moore movie, right? Like and it goes to Cuba and all this. And I'm not saying I don't like that, but it's not fitting. And then suddenly by the time they get to London, Norway, it's now this really serious, dramatic movie all of a sudden. And I just, to me, the tone of the movie didn't match. And when it goes over, almost 3 hours, whatever it was, you really see it there.
Yeah.
And I think that applies to a lot of elements in that movie. The villain, obviously, if Bond's gonna get killed off, that villain you'd think would be like the most powerful villain ever. You think about like we said, we bring up Marvel again, but like with the Thanos or whatever in the Marvel, right? Who's just like tremendously powerful. No, like it's not even going to be Blofeld, right? It's going to be like
Yeah.
some little guy
Yeah.
that was angry about something that was done to his family, and Bond just kind of got in the way of that. To me, that's, once again, it's like how much thought has gone into this.
Yeah.
It's like connect the dots, we need this to happen, so let's connect the dots, rather than investing in figuring out all these things. So those were some of my bigger things. I wish the suits had fitted better. This like gap in the collar that's happening all the way. Those are little things, but they're things, once again, that create Bond, right? And I think when we left, I told Christopher, I said, I'm just yearning to go watch Die Another Day. And I never thought I'd say that. But I was yearning.
A palate cleanser.
Yeah, exactly. I was yearning for that. But yeah, those were my thoughts on No Time to Die. And I'm glad though that we're at a point now where we're moving on.
Yeah.
And
Fresh slate.
my personal opinion is I'm glad. Like I said, I'm appreciative of certain things that Daniel Craig brought to the role, but I am definitely ready for a new Bond and changes as we go forth. And I have a personal this, I have no proof of this. This is like my own, thing, but I do think there's something in the way that Eon does things, the way they structure their Bond, per each Bond, that they want that last Bond movie to leave yearning for the new Bond. And usually it's by the last Bond movie not being super great. Like we think of Die Another Day, or we think of View to a Kill, where Roger Moore's getting older and things. But I think they wanted this movie to be epic for Daniel Craig, and so they did it in a different way. But look where they've left the Bond fans, right? A lot of Bond fans did not like No Time to Die. And I think there's a lot of Bond fans that are really excited about what the next steps are. And I know we're
Mhm.
going to talk about that now. And so I think No Time to Die in a way was a different way to do that. But my personal opinion is that's not completely random. I think there's a little bit of calculation there in terms of what they want to do to set up for the next Bond. Because if you look at the first Bond movie from pretty much every actor, their success of that first Bond movie has allowed them to continue the series for 60 years.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that they're going to look to do that same thing as they move forward.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, if we go back to Die Another Day, Die Another Day was an incredibly successful film financially at the box office. It was one of the highest grossing Bond films out of all 25 films. Um, Problem was creatively, the film just wasn't it. Tsunami surfing, invisible cars, all that stuff. It just took Bond to a place that was just way too far out, and that speaks to my appreciation of the Daniel Craig era, bringing back an element of credibility to the Bond films, because the Bond films, they definitely deserve it. It's not easy carrying a series of films from the 60s through to the 70s, through every decade since the 60s. And before we even got to the end of the 60s, you had the media. I remember there was no internet or anything like that, but you had the media pretty much proclaiming, this is Bond is no more. Bond won't be able to survive the 70s. Bond won't be able to survive the 80s. But same thing with the 90s. Again, when Pierce Brosnan took over, and M calls him a relic of the Cold War. Again, it was kind of GoldenEye kind of justified his position in this post-Cold War era. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right, David. When it comes to the next film or the next Bond actor, the film, the previous film always kind of leaves the audience wanting more. And I feel as though Bond is in a very unique position because it's the only series of films where whoever the incumbent actor is, people are always looking to who's going to be the next one. So there's always that level of excitement about Bond. It's no surprise that in the film that James Bond dies, at the end of the film, you still get James Bond will return. To the uninitiated, they'd be thinking, wait, hold on a second. James Bond just died and James Bond is going to return. How does that make sense? But obviously as hardcore fans, we know the deal. So yeah. I'm really looking forward to Bond 26. And I really do. And I just also want to say, just in case any of your listeners may be thinking we're just ragging on the producers or ragging on the series. We're
only partially doing that.
You're only partially doing that. I'm very appreciative of Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson for what they've done. I know it's not easy. A lot of hard work does go into it. That being said, they are human beings. They do make mistakes. They're not going to get everything right. And I see a lot of people talking about, oh, they need to sell it to somebody else or whatever. And I mean, it's the internet, so it's all, it's, you're going to get a lot of opinions. And I personally, right now, don't trust Bond in the hands of anybody else other than Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson. I think right now for Bond 26, this is a perfect opportunity for them to bring in new writers. They experimented with Kerry Fukunaga as the first American director, which is great because the Bond films have had American writers, so the American talent behind the camera has been there from the very beginning. But yeah, I'm really excited for Bond 26, and I really do hope.
I agree, and I think I'm all support. Like I said, I like we've been, especially me, maybe a little bit ragging on Eon, but I'm all supportive of them continuing. I have not been super happy with some of the other franchises, like these ones that have been bought by Disney, right?
Yeah.
Star Wars, if you read the rumor mill right now about the new Indiana Jones rumors and
Oh
things.
yeah.
So I think they do have a connection. I just think the risk is, if do they want to do it, and they have to really want to keep doing it.
Yeah.
Because like I said, kind of going back to my sports analogy, if you have owners that aren't really in it, then while it's risky to do something new, you got to have people that are in it to win it, right? In sports,
Sure.
and for here, in it to do this, and so that's kind of the next steps, and I guess
Yeah.
we'll see where those things go.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we've been going for a little while here, but maybe we want to finish it out, Christopher,
Yeah,
with kind of
I
some
was
next steps of where we want to see Bond 26. What do you think?
yeah, I was just gonna say, geez, you guys, it sounds like you guys have done this before. You guys are killing it when it comes to the segues, because now we're going into the what would we consider to make it right and how to right the ship for the coming Bond 26 and the future franchise, and then kind of what I would like to see changed. Something new that no one's really, I mean, he's had his companions, he's had some helpers along the way, but how interesting would it be to see somebody as elite as Bond, and how, strong and how witty and smart, the ultimate spy, use that knowledge, and how would he react when having somebody has to train, or somebody that he has to make possibly to be part of the next generation of MI6 double O's, and how would their chemistry be? Would it be kind of going back and forth, kind of like the master and Padawan type of thing?
Buddy cop Bond.
But yeah, exactly, right?
Bond meets
Um,
Lethal Weapon.
yes. And it would be cool to see what we're, have them go on a few missions, starting off, obviously meeting each other, go have them go on missions, and then have one big ultimate mission at the end where they prove themselves and they kind of, um,
Yeah,
but
I love that
yeah.
idea, Christopher. And I
Mhm.
one of my big things that I've wanted to see in a Bond movie, one of my big things about all the Bond movies, really, I never feel like the Felix character is addressed the same way it is in the books. Because I love the relationships. In fact, that was like the big thing in Spectre, right? People were
Yeah.
saying the Scooby-Doo gang and all that.
Mhm.
I actually like that part of that movie, and I think it could have been used more. They kind of said, "Oh, we're going to ignore that going into No Time to Die," right? With
Right.
Moneypenny.
Yeah, and it would be really
Um,
cool to see also, how, and ultimately, okay, we'll talk about having the keys later after we all share our points, but another thing that I really am missing and really wish to see, especially more within the grittier and more gruesome Bond, is an actual enemy, or the villain at the same tier as Bond, and them going head to head and actually fighting. Like, if you look back at the Craig era and kind of really the past, you know, 20 years, really, I mean, there's not really a villain that, yeah, and it's all about the villain being bombastic and memorable, but we haven't gotten like gruesome one-on-one fighting, as, yeah, again, going back to Slate and Quantum, we've had, other baddies go against each other, but we haven't had like the ultimate villain be at that same top tier of Bond. And I think it would be really cool if we could have that back, kind of like the Red Grant and From Russia with Love, and just have that
Even the
fighting.
007.
007 versus, yeah, I think that
Yeah.
I think that that fight in the satellite tower,
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was one of probably Brosnan's best fight scene,
Mm-hmm.
because it was a real display of hand to hand, CQC, close quarters combat,
Mm-hmm.
where okay, he's a skilled fighter, so he's definitely capable, but then they kind of dropped that for something a bit more kind of meat and potatoes, comical kind of fighting style. But yeah, having somebody who is on par with Bond physically, um, like to get, and is also an ultimate villain rather than a henchman like Patrice in in Skyfall. It would be good to see that for sure.
And
I think that's a thing of the times too. I think that's one of the things that of this Daniel Craig time, what they were doing. A lot of the movies that were coming out at that time had villains where it wasn't about the physical back to forth. It was about kind of the more mental, whatever it might be. And I think we're at a time now where we're getting back to that. I mean, the Marvel movies especially have brought us back to that. But and I agree. I think that one-on-one, mano a mano villain with Bond is something that would be great.
Yeah. Now, gentlemen, your guys' thoughts of where we should go and what things should be fixed in the future?
Yeah, I think so. When we talk about transitioning from Pierce Brosnan to Daniel Craig and the influences, it's typically Bourne, and I feel as though to some extent that's correct. But I also feel like shows like 24, Jack Bauer, and I feel that was also an influence as well. And I think it wouldn't be a disservice or harmful to Bond to kind of look at 24. I'm not saying to necessarily lift stuff directly from 24, but just look at how they told their stories, or what kind of story beats and elements that they used. Because we hear Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson always talking about how, okay, what kind of story can we tell? What's going on in the world today? And I think that's fine, but you can't always rely or wait on some big event going on in the world to inspire you to tell a story. And how much harder is it for a TV show that ran 10 seasons or however long it ran for to come up with pretty gripping and interesting stories? So I think the producers definitely need to bring on board a writer who knows how to tell a gripping and engaging story. Okay, waiting.
So I'm guessing that means no Purvis and Wade. Is that what you're saying?
Well, see, the thing about Purvis and Wade is I'm always hearing conflicting stories. I'm hearing that they are, I mean, first of all, they definitely know their Bond, but they come up with ideas, and sometimes their scripts are actually good, but then they bring in somebody else to rewrite the script, and then they change it, and it's not good, and all that stuff. So I don't know, but I think the producers definitely need to step outside their comfort zone and bring in some fresh new talent. Purvis and Wade, they've been there since '99, since The World Is Not Enough. And that's all well and good. I'm all for loyalty and everything, but at the same time, we can't rely on what's comfortable, what we're used to. We really need to bring in new talent in order to move things forward, because not much has really changed. I don't want to see another Bond film where there's a mole, there's it's personal. I want to see a great gripping story where there's action, where there's intrigue. James Bond is a man. He's employed by Her Majesty, or His Majesty's Secret Service now, and he works for the government. So let him go to work, let him get his assignment, and let him go out and do his job. I don't want. Can you imagine going out to do a job and you find out that your cousin's best friend's nephew is the ultimate villain or something? Somebody personal, or somebody a bit too close to home. Let's not do that. let's tell some really great stories, because it's possible. People have been telling stories since the beginning of time. It's not impossible to tell a great spy story.
And I don't think that's anything new in terms of, there's been a lot of people that have worked on Bond movies over 60 years, and I think that's one of the things that has made the movies great. And some things have been maybe good, some not as good, but it does seem a little bit over the last however many years that it has become kind of like, keep it close to the family, right? Like these are the people we're going to use the same thing over and over. And I get that, but I do think we were just talking, Fletcher, that there's advantages of collaboration and new ideas. Some of the ideas you might like, some of them you might not like, but when you hear those and then you start using ideas from those different things to create a vision, it can be more powerful, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, yeah, for me, what I'd like to see, obviously, as I mentioned, I do want it to go back to Fleming. And I know they keep saying this, and I know that was like a big thing during the Daniel Craig era, like, oh, we're going back to Fleming. And there were some elements, I think so, but I think there were a lot of elements of the Daniel Craig Bond that were not anything like Fleming. Particularly like what is Fleming's Bond? Like, what is his characterization? And like I said, my personal belief is I think they ignored a lot of those things because they really liked Daniel Craig. And that's, some like, some don't like, whatever it might be in the middle. But I think there also is a vision of, kind of like you had mentioned earlier, Fletcher, that the James Bond characterization, it's just too old fashioned. It's not going to connect in today's world. And I just don't think that's true. It's connected for 60 years. And I think it works. And I actually think there's still a lot of that characterization from the novels that hasn't really been portrayed in the films. His kind of dislike for having to kill people, even though it's his job. And he has to do what it is for country, for the betterment of the world, but he doesn't necessarily enjoy it, but he does it because he has to be doing it. He has the tools to do it. I think also, kind of like I brought up briefly with Christopher's topic, like the connection with the people in his life. I like that element, and I think it's something that hasn't really been addressed. I think I'd love to see a Felix that is much more like the Felix in the books. That's not just some joke character on the side, or even like Felix in No Time to Die, which wasn't really a joke character, but was just kind of a subsidiary, and we're going to kill him off in 10 minutes. But someone that is really in a different way, somewhat of an equal of Bond. There are times in the books where Felix is, Bond doesn't know what to do, and Felix comes up with the answer, right?
Yeah.
And that's something I would love to see. Because then you're building a character that actually has emotional connection. And I know there was a lot of talk with Daniel Craig about, his acting and the emotions that he brought. For me, I didn't get it. I didn't get the emotional connection between Bond and Madeline. Even between Bond and Felix in this last movie. Felix wasn't in however many Bond movies since Quantum, and barely in that. I don't like why would he? Why am I supposed to believe he would care that Felix is dead? To me, that's something. If you're gonna really create emotion, really do it. But I'm not sure if the script and the things that they did really created those relationships. And I'm a big fan of relationships in movies. Like, I think not necessarily romantic relation, but just connection between people. And I'd love to see that in the next Bond movie. M would be another one. You think back to like the Moonraker novel and the whole opening of that. And those types of connections, I think, are just really important. Obviously, I like to see more movies. But I think, and I think that can be done, but I think it has to want to be done by Eon. I think the other big thing with Fleming's Bond, kind of getting back to that, is I want someone that has suave, and I think that's, to me, what Daniel Craig had. A lot of elements to Bond, like his assassin element, his physicality. I think those were all great things. I wouldn't call Daniel Craig suave, my personal opinion. And I would like someone that has that element, that at times enjoys part of life. Because guess what? That's another part of the book Bond, right? Even though there are times that are hard, he also at times enjoys elements of life. And I don't think we ever really saw that in the Craig era.
What is it? There's literally a line in the book that says there are moments of great luxury in the life of a secret agent. I miss seeing that, like even like with the Pierce when he's in Cuba, he's literally in a shirt, having a cigar and looking at birds, and he looks like he's enjoying life. So I mean, I totally get that, and that would be a cool element to see again.
I mean, to be fair, he just came out of a North Korean torture camp,
Yeah.
so
Well,
yeah.
yeah.
But no, I absolutely agree, and it goes back to what I was saying about how I never felt as though I wanted to be Daniel Craig's James Bond, because he yes, he's great at what he does, but I just never felt connected to him to that point where it's like, yes, this is the man who I want to be. When I see Connery, um, in Doctor No, when he's walking across the casino with Sylvia, I mean, the guy is just dripping with suave
Mhm.
sophistication. The way he walks, the way he talks, um, you know, it's just perfect. Even
Mhm.
Lazenby walking down the steps at the hotel
Mhm.
casino, again, I always felt that. Don't get me wrong, Daniel Craig is a great actor, but I always felt that when he was trying to do the suave elements, he was acting, and
Mhm.
I never really bought it. And I noticed that for his character, he overcompensated in certain areas. So I think out of all the Bond actors, he says, please, I think he says thank you more than anybody else. So don't get me wrong, he's being gentlemanly, but it's very noticeable the amount of times he says thank you, because he's trying to be that sort of suave,
Mhm.
gentlemanly guy rather than just actually being it. You know,
Right.
even the
Interesting.
way
Yeah.
he walks, he's got a good walk, but again, he, I feel like he's telegraphing his performance, whereas with Connery, I mean, I think it's a bit unfair to compare
Yeah.
Craig to
Definitely.
Connery,
But I think
but
the other element of that is like, did he even care about it? Right? Does he want, like, I don't, I think if you asked him, I don't know what he would say, but I just don't think I don't think that was a priority for what he viewed for Bond. I think he had his own priorities, which I guess every actor has to, and every actor has to, I'm sure, play to their own strengths too, which I think he
yeah,
did.
Mhm.
yeah,
But that's why it's kind of above him, of this idea of getting to a Bond that embraces that we can show, the lifestyle elements of Bond. Think back to like Connery and even Roger Moore, where you see Bond in his apartment, or you see Bond doing something that's kind of mundane, right?
Mhm.
But I mean, we as fans love those things, right? We go crazy and we go out
yeah,
and buy lots of things and all this stuff. And
Or even start up
but could
podcasts and
in a
talk about
way,
stuff.
yeah, exactly. And in a way, like, it almost would be ridiculous to see Daniel Craig doing some of those things, because they're just not those natural suave elements that is part of what, I don't think were his priority for Bond. So I would really like to see those in the next Bond. And obviously all these things, as Fletcher mentioned, I think his ideas were awesome about, really crafting a story based on these things, influenced by Fleming, and hopefully working on many story ideas. I
mm,
think that's one thing, not necessarily connected story ideas. I personally would rather them not be like a arc, right? Like we've
Mhm.
had, but I do think they need to start thinking about um, multiple
standalone adventures.
stories at a
Yeah,
time, and so that they can outreach more, um
Mhm.
because that really seems to be, like you I think mentioned earlier, Fletcher, what is holding them up is the story element. And so that needs to kind of be going all the time. And I mean, I know that you probably, both of you guys, have heard these talks about, well, okay, with Amazon, do they do a like a TV show or different things? And I mean, my personal thought is I would love to see a TV show that is like a period piece, but that's not going to be the Bond movies, right? And we know that, like,
Mhm.
I don't think Eon will do that. But I do think a bigger infusion of Bond um is kind of the last thing that for me I'd really like to see, um them stepping up to making it more part of our society. And I can't really speak. I was actually really surprised, Chris Fletcher, you and I both got to be at the Casino Royale in concert and the Bond movies in concert in London. And it
Yep.
was kind of shocking to me because here in America, we go to a Bond movie, most of it is kind of older gentlemen. There's some kids, some younger people like Christopher and I, but on the whole, I wouldn't say there's a big, feeling for Bond here. It's like, oh, there's a Bond coming out, I guess maybe we'll go see it. Or we'll go see it for dad, that kind of thing. Whereas, and I was amazed being there, seeing the full Royal Albert Hall full to see this movie that came out, over 15 years ago. And all kinds of people, women, adults, children. And that's what I'd like Bond to be. I'd like Bond to be something that, I got into when I was relatively young. I was 8 years old, 7 years old, something like that. And have been in it ever since and probably will be. And but to do that, I think there has to be more of those Fleming elements, and also more things going out, more product, more things that people can connect to, because when they go away, that's when people kind of forget about Bond. Obviously not the hardcore fans like us, but the general public. And I think Bond's too good of a story not to keep it going.
Absolutely.
That's the reason we're here 60 years later. And I have a feeling like Bond is, you talk about Bond's a hero for the ages. I think he's a hero for the world. He's a staple within the cinematic universe, and he's a staple really in reality. I mean, there have been so many, and I don't know if it's because it's been the 60th anniversary, but I feel like I've been catching so many references when it comes to different shows on TV or different other movies to Bond than I ever have this past year. And I think it doesn't even have to be related. Could be some type of rom-com or some type of show or kids show on Nickelodeon or something, for example. That's still a thing. But
we see what you watch, Christopher.
Yeah, well, there you go. But they talk about a Bond, or they say their last name first followed by their first name, which is a Bond element. There's so many. The Bond has really just been flooded in the world. I think it's safe to say that he will return, and it's just a matter of the right minds, the right stories, and everything that we've kind of talked about today to make it last for another 60 years. So
yeah, I mean, first of all, thanks for having me and inviting me along to take part in this discussion. Really appreciate it. I've enjoyed speaking to you guys. I just going forward, I just want the Bond films to be fun again. I want to leave a Bond film pumped. Yes, James Bond is here, he's back, we're going to see him next time, but at the same time, I really want to enjoy these films. I can appreciate Bond going through some emotional beats, but I don't want this guy wrecked. We've had 17 years of this. Let's let him get back to doing what he does best. Stop the bad guy, get the girls, drink the martinis, really drive the cars. I probably might get a lot of hate for this, but one of my favorite pre-title sequences is the opening to Quantum of Solace. That car chase is just brilliant. It's crazily edited, yes, but it's just raw. I absolutely love it. But yeah, I just want to see great action, and I want to just enjoy and feel like, yes, this is the Bond who I want to be. I want to do what he just did. All the other franchises, they're great. Congratulations to them. But the king, James Bond, is king, and he needs to reclaim his throne.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and we would I'm sure we'd love, if you're willing to come back, we'd love to have you on again, and we'll talk some other topic. It's been great. This is kind of a fun, we're kind of creating some different series here on Those Bond Guys, and I think this idea of kind of an open forum where we bring on a guest and they bring something to us and we can talk about it. It's just a really, really cool thing. So thank you, Fletcher, for being the first one
thank you.
for that. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Really appreciate it as well.
Yeah.
Well, we
and
hope everybody has a very, very happy holidays coming up. And obviously, we're excited to make more content in the new year. We're going to get back on this, right, Chris?
Oh yeah, we're gonna be on this next year. There's gonna be some big things coming your way when it comes to different avenues within not just the Bond franchise, but the lifestyle. Kind of like a maybe a how-to, if you will. Many more guests and many more topics to be shared. But that being said, this concludes it for this episode 3 of Those Bond Guys podcast. And we hope you guys, again, like David said, enjoy a happy holidays and a very great new year. And as always, we will catch you on the next episode. Take care.